We can't really awaken from the dream unless we recognize that we are dreaming, that we are not only dreaming, that we are facilitating the process of the dream. At some point, you've got to recognize that you are dreaming and then begin to do something to change that. The way A Course in Miracles talks about that is you do it by removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. So what I want to talk a little bit about is what we have to do to remove those blocks that stands in the way of love's presence. Another way of talking about love's presence, we could talk about God's presence. I mean, God is the universe. God is everything. We're all one. We're a part of the oneness, but it's not until we're a part of the oneness, the real oneness, that's not dreaming, right? So there's no dreaming going on in heaven. What we're really talking about here is waking up to seeing eternity, to seeing reality, to seeing who we really are outside of the dream. But again, you can't do that unless you recognize you're dreaming. We all have free will. You have to have free will for a very simple reason. And that very simple reason is that God has free will. And you're a part of God. So if God has free will and you're a part of God, then you've got free will too. But herein, as we say, is the rub. Because the rub is that you could misuse your free will. You could decide to see things differently, and that's what we've done. That's the whole Adam and Eve story. That is making the decision to separate from God, to separate from wholeness. We said, thank you very much, God. I'm going to do it myself. And then we go out there and we try to do it ourselves. And of course, you can't really do it without God. I mean, you can't really do it without, what is God? Another definition, love. You can't do it without love. If you go out there and try to create your own world, but you try to do it without love, well, then you, what Course calls, miscreate. Right now, we are seeing a great deal of miscreation going on in the world in terms of a couple of major battles that are going, wars that are happening at the present time. And not only that, but one of the major fun power plays that the ego gets caught up in is we're caught up in political battles and ego battles and who's on top. It's always a matter of who's on top. You don't really want to be there. You don't really want to be on top because there's always anguish going on with there. There's a line in the Course where it says, talking about the ego, power, fame, money, to whom do these things belong? Well, they're all things that the ego would seek after, but at the same time that they're all things that they seek after, they're not really going to make you happy. The only real happiness comes in that we love each other, that we really love each other, that we treat each other as brothers and sisters. And in truth, because we literally recognize the identity in the other. The identity is also the divinity. In the Course in Miracles, when it talks about your identity, you'll have the Y will be capitalized and the I is capitalized, your identity. It's talking about your true identity, who you really are, not as a body, not in terms of space and time, but in terms of a spiritual being. Pierre Telly de Chardin first used the phrase that says we're spiritual beings, having this physical kind of experience. So that's what we're trying to awaken to. So we have to look at, the Course in Miracles says in the very, very first paragraph of the Course, in the introduction, what are the blocks that we build that prevent this kind of awareness? That we have to remove the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. That's our task. That's our job. This whole world, this place is a school. The Course is very clear. The Course uses the word classroom. There are other works like A Course of Love, which uses the word school. That is a very common theme that's been used throughout the ages in a whole variety of different mystical traditions. It's not new with the Course in Miracles at all, reaffirming an ancient and spiritual truth. So here we are trying to wake up, but the first thing you got to do is become aware of the fact that you are dreaming, that you're not just kind of caught in the dreaming of the world. Let's talk about the dreaming of the world for a moment. This line in the Course is, the dreaming of the world takes many forms. right? Because the ego seeks in many ways to affirm its reality and make itself real. So there's all these myriad of forms that the ego could find to make itself real. And that gets us really confused because we really kind of begin to believe maybe that some of these things are real. So we go after fame, fortune, power, money, physical pleasures, all of which has its limitation on it because it's only going to give you something of the world. One of the parables in the Gospels is about the man who built bigger barns. And it says, one season his crop produces abundantly. And he says, oh, what am I going to do with all my resources? I know I will build bigger barns, and I will put all of this aside. And I will say, soul, you have much for yourself, right? And then the next passage, and it says, you fool, this very night your life is required of you, right? So going out there and building bridges, building bigger worlds, getting a lot of money, owning a lot of property, whatever that is, we all need enough to see our way through the world and be secure. But that can easily become an ego goal that we go after, and it doesn't get you anything except what it gets you, and that's a part of the material world. So materialism would be one of the ways that we dream the world. I'm going to have the material resources available. Or fame, I'm going to become a famous person. You probably all know Dr. David Hawkins has a line in one of his books where he says, routinely, famous people discover that being famous is odersome and burdensome to them once the novelty of the thing has worn off. So power, fame, money, physical pleasures, nothing wrong with physical pleasures, but boy, oh boy, it's really easy to overdo that. And if you overdo that, then you begin to get into trouble. So what I'm talking about here is the dreaming of the world and all the ways that you can dream the world, whether it be any of the physical kinds of things that I'm talking about right now or something else. The ego dreams some fierce dreams. And in those dreams, let's say, for example, one of the major problems, of course, is the major problem. The major problem we all have is projection or judgment. And we're seeing problems with the world. So the ego makes itself better by finding problems out there in the world, right? So whatever is going on is a problem for them. And that keeps us blind. That keeps us from being able to see anything at all. Chapter 21, section 1, beautiful part, you probably know it. Projection makes perception. The world you see is what you make it. In other words, the dream you dream is the dream that you're dreaming, and you are dreaming that dream until you can wake up enough to know that you are dreaming. That's why what we need to do, the first step we need to get to, is to become lucid dreamers. I am at this time working on a book called Living a Lucid Life, which doesn't mean that you're free of the dream. It doesn't mean you're out of the dream. It doesn't mean you're awakened, but it does mean you're on the way to awakening. Right? That's what to be. If you're not awakened yet, at least get on the path. At least get going in such a direction that bit by bit, gently, you are waking up. As you begin to see the insanity of the world, so depending on the part of the world that I live in, travel very much. You travel a great deal. You see there's all different kinds of cultures out there with all kinds of different dreams that they're dreaming in and of themselves. And it maybe seem silly to you, but it's not to those folks who are dreaming that particular dream. And sometimes when a dream is threatened, that's when we get into real trouble, because then we actually have cultural wars that happen between different cultures, between different societies. And not only that, but as we grow, as we mature, as we get older, as we also expand our consciousness, more and more things become possible for us, which then enable us to see, oh, there's some silly stuff going on within the dream. The 10th characteristic of a teacher of God, is described in the Manual for Teachers of A Course in Miracles, is called open-mindedness. And it's interesting the way that opening mindedness section starts. It says, open-mindedness perhaps the last characteristic a teacher of God develops. Isn't that interesting? Perhaps the last characteristic that a teacher of God develops. Why would open-minded? That means total open-mindedness. That means receptivity. That means not judging anything. That means not putting other people down, not having opinions. We're filled with our opinions, and the opinion is just an opinion. Opinions have done more destructive things. That Voltaire once said, nothing is more destructive than opinions. No earthquakes or devastations of any kind are as devastating as having an opinion. That's the worst thing you can have. In other words, you're saying it has to be this way, and if it's not this way, well, then you don't fit in with this culture. You don't fit into this piece of the dream. You don't fit into the way things are supposed to be. So what we really want to be doing is we want to be waking up. We want to be engaged in the process of awakening. What you want to do is you want to get your foot on the path. You want to be headed home. That's the main thing. You want to be awakening within the dream. And the first step to do that is to realize you are dreaming. And as I begin to see that I'm dreaming, then maybe there's some things that I can do to change that. So how do I become aware of the fact that I'm dreaming? Well, one initial good way is to just begin to realize, A, this is a school. B, I put myself into a series of classrooms. I chose these classrooms. And now if I begin to go through some difficult classes, then I may ask myself the question, well, why do I have to go through this? Let me give you some examples. Let's say that you're going through a divorce. Now you're going through a divorce. That's a very difficult thing to do. And you may say, I never asked for this. I never asked for this. I didn't want to have to go through this. Well, true enough, it may seem that way on the surface of things, but on the deeper level of the knowledge of what your soul, your spirit needed to learn, you actually signed up for this. Maybe you can't remember doing that, of course, but let's say that before you come into this world, we all sign up for a series of classes. This is a school, right? This is actually what it really is. This is a reformatory. We're all here because we need to be engaged in some kind of reform. All right. So here's a class. I'll take this. Oh, look here. Here's a class called bankruptcy. I wonder what it would be like to take the bankruptcy course. I bet I could learn a lot that way. Oh yeah, you can learn a lot that way. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Well, look here. Here's a course. This is called cancer. Now, I wonder what I could learn in the cancer classroom. Well, go through cancer and you'll find out what you can learn, And so it is. That's the whole world is like that. We're in this world to learn a variety of things, all of which are designed to help us wake up.